Hey, folks, welcome to episode 87 of Stand Up. I'm Pete Dominic. Today's episode welcomes MSNBC anchor and old friend of mine, Ali Velshi. But before I get to him, I'm debunking conspiracy theories with a group of 30 of my friends who are subscribers to this show. So let me hit some music and let's do this. Hey, guys. Hello, family. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 87 of Stand Up. Joining me here at the top are about, 34 of my new best friends to help me with the opening of today's show. And I'm very excited to have all of you guys here. Thank you very much for joining me via private video link chat for exclusive subscribers at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can join me. You can have your voice heard as well. So sign up for a subscription because many of the people here tonight hopefully will add to what I'm saying, maybe push back on what I'm saying, maybe have a story of their own, and maybe many of you will just want to sit there and watch. We are happy to have you hanging out with us here on the show. All right. So I'm going to bring down the music, and I'm going to take everybody off mute. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 30 folks hanging out at the opening of the show. I want everybody to make some noise.
Hey.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds like four people. Sounds like four people, but it's
Taking off a mute at the same time.
everybody. I swear there's 31 people here, but let's try one more time. Everybody making noise on their mics. Come on, everybody. Happy. I don't know how it works, but I'm going to go ahead and argue that one person may be canceling out another person. I don't know. Some of you did stay there with your mouths closed. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for joining me here on the Monday episode. And we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to rant for a little bit about the conspiracy theories that we are seeing about the coronavirus. We talked a little bit about it right before we started. I muted everybody again there, by the way. But here's the thing. Yesterday morning, I wake up and Val, my wife, is in a text conversation with a dance mom. Let's call her Kathy. She texted a link to a video featuring this crazy quack doctor ranting about how COVID-19 was fake and all kinds of unbelievable horse shit. And she was texting my wife. She's like, I just thought you'd want to see this. Now, this woman had already texted Val. They'd already tangled. My wife had already pushed back on her crazy theories. These are the anti-vax couple at my daughter's, in our community, at the dance studio. They're both chiropractors. I'm not trying to paint all chiropractors with a broad brush, but they got some harebrained theories, and they got some things that I think work. But they tend to there be an overlap with the anti-vax, in my opinion. If you're a chiropractor, I'm sorry, by all means, push back. But this doctor that she sent us a video of, I did a little research on, this is the kind of guy that we humans have seen for generations. They're the worst kind of people, in my opinion. Because what they do is they take desperate folks who have cancer, for example. This is a lot of what he did, who have tried all kinds of other therapies and nothing is working. Then they come to him for his, quote, experimental theories, therapies, which are not experimental, really. They're shit he's making up, okay? And they go to him, and guess what? Believe it or not, his rock necklace and essential oils and all this other kind of bullshit doesn't work, and the patient that he is treating dies, okay? Then, after the kid dies, in some cases it was children, this guy goes after the $10,000 or $20,000 that the family owed him. After his stupid, unproven theories don't work, he still goes after their money. The North Carolina Board of whatever medical examiners brought him up on trial and said he could not practice with kids or cancer patients anymore. But he keeps going with his crazy theories. There have been doctors like this across human civilization for generations, just promising you, I'll save your life, then you die, and what? You owe him money? So this is the video that this woman sent. I have been dealing with these kinds of folks for years. I used to be party to some of these theories. When I first started my show in 2008, one of the first episodes was a guest who was a 9/11 truther. I invited him on the show, and the next day I regretted it. But I was buying into some of it. Another thing, real quick, Oliver Stone comes on the show. I don't want to brag, Oliver Stone on the show. That's right, interviewed him, loves me. This is before he had gone completely Russian, And he, of course, is the director of not Born on the 4th of July, JFK. Did you do Born on the 4th of July too? Is that Oliver Stone? Yeah, it was. I still have you guys on mute. Sorry. So Oliver Stone tells me this amazing in the interview story about how Oswald could not have committed the assassination alone. He tells me that after the assassination of JFK years later, they brought in all these sharpshooters to try to make the exact same shot. None of them could make it. Well, guess what? I bought it. I was like, well, if that's the case, then that's all I need to hear. They brought in sharpshooters and none of them could make it. I bought it. Then, after that interview aired, people came to me and said, yeah, they tried that again with other sharpshooters and everybody made it. The point is, all of us can be convinced by something if it's convincing and we don't know other facts, other data to debunk it. But what's happening right now in America is nuts because we were starting to unify in the idea that we had to self-isolate, that we had to quarantine. And now you have pockets of Americans led by conservative conspiracy theorists who are saying, we want out. And these theories are being raised up by some of the most prominent people in right-wing media. And it's crazy, and I'm really scared about it, and I wanted to talk with you about the things that you're hearing and why anybody would believe in these, and if there's any way to convince people out of what they believe in. But as the coronavirus pandemic has spread around the world, a number of media outlets are reporting about this. It was on the cover of the New York Times, I think, yesterday, and I'm just about to finish this rant and go to you. With millions infected and thousands dead, billionaire Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist Bill Gates has pledged $250 million to combat the disease through his foundation. He's been an advocate, Bill Gates, for pandemic preparedness for years. He and his foundation, his wife, have been contributing millions of dollars. They've saved millions of lives in HIV/AIDS and malaria and polio. And the idea that he is somehow behind this for whatever reason is, well, it's absolutely insane. And my big question to anybody is, I start with this. What is your baseline? So I told Val, the Texas woman back yesterday, what is her baseline? Does she believe that 21 kids were killed in Newtown at the Sandy Hook School? Did she believe that? Does she believe that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust? Does she believe that American astronauts landed on the moon? What is the baseline for the person that you're dealing with? I usually start with that to know where I'm at. And then I simply ask, what would be the motivation behind this theory? And finally, I ask the person to defend the theory or what are their sources? And the final point is, all of us can do research online. Anybody can Google, okay? But if you're not conducting ice core studies, then shut the hell up about climate change and ask someone who has. If you're not conducting randomized controlled studies, if you've not written a peer-reviewed study, if there's a consensus, a scientific consensus, at some point, Google is not going to be enough, and you have to trust the experts. All right, that is pretty much the end of my rant. And I'd love to hear from anybody, anything that you would add to what I'm saying, anything that you would push back on what I'm saying, and specifically the danger of this situation right now where people are believing that Bill Gates is behind this, that if there is, by the way, a vaccine, they're not going to take it. They're terrified of being microchipped, all kinds of crazy stuff, all, guess what, being led by our insane president and a lot of his cheerleaders as well. So, and I want to hear from everybody right now because anybody that has anything. So raise your hand or just start talking and I can edit. All right, Therese, you are on. Everybody else quiet for a moment. Therese, what are your thoughts on this? And what is in your background of your shot in the Zoom chat? Cupcakes?
These are just some cupcakes.
Very nice. Very nice. No big deal. Just some amazing looking cupcakes.
One of my oldest and dearest friends has been coming to me and telling me that she thinks that Bill Gates, who is somehow behind this whole thing, and when they finally get a vaccine, they're going to put a microchip in everyone that they vaccine so they can follow people with this thing. And that's, and she said to me, have you heard of Q? And I said, the letter Q? And she said, yeah, have you heard of Q? I want you to look it up. And I'm like, QAnon? Like, she's all in. She is all in on this thing. I don't think I can be friends with her anymore. I don't know what to do about it.
Therese, I want other people to just keep chiming in here, and I'll try to respond to some of these, or other people can respond to them. I appreciate you telling me that. It's very depressing, and I'm not going to sit here and ask what someone's education is. I think that educated people can be really distracted and take their eye off the ball. Some of these things can be very convincing. Obviously, some of them are bizarre. I don't even want to condescend to people. I don't even want to judge people. I want to find a way. If there's a way to convince them, then I'd love to find it. If there's a way to just keep talking about it and make sure other people don't go down that road before they do, I'd like to talk about that. Who's next? Who else wants to weigh in on someone that they know? Heather, you're up.
Well, I'm really upset about my dad. My husband was just telling me that my neighbor said that if could just get it early, everybody will have immunity and we'll all be much safer.
Oh my God.
I mean, unless you die.
If everybody would just get it earlier.
Like the chicken pox parties are.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Heather. All right. Who's next? Dan. Go ahead, Dan.
I think that we have this all wrong. Just like every press conference that the president has ever had, he throws so much shit out there. We spend a million days refuting everything. The one stat I keep coming back to is 1 in 4 people in this world, in this country, are, in other words, 4.25% of the world's population is the United States. 1 in 4 have died in the United States. So we've got 25% of the world that's died in the U.S. We've got 1 in 3 people who have it in the United States. If you take a look at it from 4.25 to 1 in 4 or 1 in 3, how does that happen? That's the focus. Just we all have heard the same stuff from the World Health Organization. We've all have heard the same stuff from China, and we all reacted differently. The reason we are so far behind the curve is because we reacted late because of our president. So let's focus on the thing that people can, it's super clear, super simple. We can see what this is. You know,
all right. So just if you're listening, you should know that in the Zoom chat, Dan actually has statistics up behind him on his shot, and his head is photoshopped in such a way, because Zoom does this, that it looks like it's really creepy. But that's how passionate he is about his point, that he literally has the stats behind him, and he's moving his head around, and it's amazing, which is why you should subscribe to be as a part of this. All right, Jacob, good points, Dan. Jacob, you are up. What's up? What are your thoughts on the conspiracy theories here?
Well, until this happened, I always loved conspiracy theories. They're fun, but like things like the Oak Island money pit, things like that don't hurt other people have always been fun and interesting to me to read about and see. But this stuff is nuts. And I know some people that are on the 5G thing, which I don't even completely understand how or where that plays into this, that 5G is causing the virus. But I saw a tweet the other day that said 5 countries have 5G and 184 have the coronavirus. So kind of makes
a cousin of mine has been on this 5G thing for like 3 years. She sends me links on the 5G thing all the time, and I just don't even know how to handle it because she's my cousin and I don't want to get in an argument with her. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. I myself, by the way, should mention, I don't want to brag, I have 9G at my place. I have a 9G. That's why I'm bald. All right, so Jacob, good points. Anybody else want to weigh in on these conspiracy theories? Anybody else have a friend who has bought these, and how dangerous?
I have one.
Ronnie.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody's heard this one, but like they're saying that the numbers are being conflated. When somebody comes in with the symptoms, if they die, we automatically count them as a corona death instead of like doing an autopsy. But we're trying to make it a political thing that we're trying to run up the numbers for whatever reason. I've heard that one. I think that's ridiculous. The other thing that is ridiculous are those TV doctors, Dr. Drew, Phil, and Oz coming out on Fox, because people believe those guys.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And it's really, really dangerous to have them minimizing the.
I love how they, at least I've seen Oz, Dr. Drew definitely, and Dr. Oz, all 3 of them have walked it back. All 3 of them have walked their awfulness back, and in this humiliation fashion. It's kind of satisfying, but it doesn't matter.
Is Dr. Gada a TV doctor?
There he is, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Prakash Gada. That's who just spoke. He was on the Rachel Maddow show last week, and now he's on Stand Up with Pete Dominic. What an awful plummet.
That's the come up.
What do you think, Prakash? What do you think of the conspiracy theory stuff? And good to see you, buddy.
It's a great honor to be here. Thanks, guys. First of all, I didn't think it was Bill Gates. I thought it was the Chinese who did it. So I'm a little confused as to who's with the conspiracy. It seems to travel. First of all, I didn't mean to interrupt anybody. Everyone has knows as much about this as I do. But the bottom line is, if you believe in a conspiracy, it doesn't matter if it's the Chinese or the Martians or Bill Gates. These are the ones that do create a real problem. For example, the measles epidemic of 2019 or 2018.
That was right here where I live in Rockland County.
Yeah. Well, there was one in Disneyland too, and they had to like shut down Disneyland or something. This was before.
Yeah, it was bad, but mine is better. Okay.
The point being that there is misinformation because it tends to sell clicks. This is like the InfoWars thought process. The fighting disinformation with cold hard science is really the only way to go about doing this. And you can see that as so far, the compliance with people who are doing the stay-at-home thing has been pretty good because people understand at the end of the day, it's better to believe science because, there's fewer conspirators out there. They have a louder voice, but for the most part, when people look at, do I need to care about my kids? You make the right decision, but we still got to fight the disinformation.
Yeah, of course. But some people will argue that if you argue with these conspiracy theories, if you give them a platform, it actually spreads the theory and gives and does worse of the opposite result that you want. My question is always to these folks is follow them down their logical route. Why would someone want this? Why would people be in on this? And I think that, there is real criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal conspiracy to commit treason, robbery, tax evasion, slander, arson. Those are real crimes in the criminal code. And they usually mean two or more people are conspiring to commit a crime. And we can think, by the way, throughout history, a number of them. Most recently that comes to mind for me is the Purdue Pharma Sackler family conspiracy where they knew the opiates were addictive and they kept selling them. You can talk about Enron. You can talk about a number of different kind of criminal conspiracies. They were caught. I'm not saying they always get caught, but it's hard to pull this off. The whole Bush 9/11 thing drove me crazy as a New Yorker, like that they were in on it, that they looked the other way so they could have a war in Iraq. It's just these things, you have to follow them down their logical conclusion. And most folks, in my opinion, that believe them can't do that. They can't defend them. So why do they believe in them if they can't source them and defend them? And, this lady yesterday is arguing, I'm a doctor. She's a chiropractor and she doesn't practice. And I have done my research and you haven't. I'm like, no, you haven't. You haven't. And I said, send me one epidemiologist who believes the horseshit that you believe in that lives on the very top of Horseshit Mountain. One epidemiologist. There's no epidemiologists who buy into this bullshit. There's a doctor who thinks that stone crystals are going to cure cancer. That's who's selling this shit. Dr. Barry, what are your thoughts on this? You're a physician.
I was just going to say, I think one of the more interesting things, both, I think it was Ronnie and Dan who brought it up. So I had a friend of mine, I'll say he's a friend. He's somebody who was a friend of mine probably when we were in elementary school, put up a meme about how we didn't, worry about Obama when there were 60 million bird flu cases in 2009 and 20,000 people died. So you do the basic math. That's 0.02% who died, about 1 in 10,000 people who died. So I used the very same numbers that are behind Dan tonight to show how the death rate from this is more at like 5.2%, about 270 times higher. Just the basic math. And then they go to the things that Ronnie pointed out earlier. They'll say, well, they're counting everybody as dying because if they die when they're in a hospital in the middle of this, they're immediately assigned to that. And then I responded about the EMTs in New York who are picking up 250 bodies a day instead of 25 who've died at home, who probably died from COVID, but are not being counted. I said, you can only compare apples to apples. So if you're going to argue that this is the same as H1N1, you have to use similar statistics. Even simple arguments like that, they will go down that path to try to find an excuse to not believe the information. They don't want to believe the information, Pete, because they want it to be a political statement. This is somebody else's fault. Trump acted early enough. And they're looking for any kind of port in a storm to figure out how to do that.
I think that's well explained, and I think we all do that. We all have bias, confirmation bias. We don't want to believe a thing about, whatever our political ideology is or the political, the leader that we support. But the weird thing, Dr. Hummel, is I understand your point. They don't want to believe it. It's a partisan point. You're going to die. You're going to die. for believing this. Or if you don't die, you're going to be a host. That's the thing. There's all these memes and all these jokes, but let them. If these ignorant people want to go back to work and stand in their shop, and no one's coming in to buy your shit, by the way, you're just paying your employees and not making any money because most people are smart and too afraid to come out and believe their leaders. But you're not just harming yourself. It's the classic debunking of the libertarian theory. I want freedom. The government can't tell me what to do. Yeah, but you're a host now, and you're going to take that home to me, or to anybody else that's vulnerable. All right, enough from me. Who else wants to say something about this, conspiracy theory wise? How do we argue with these folks? Should we argue with these folks? What other things have you heard? And what is this? What does this mean for us if we're going to have a partisan divide over the science, Jason?
Yeah, Pete, I have a business partner of mine who's as far as right-wing as you can get, and he's been touting a YouTube video by a Stanford
I'll decide
PhD.
that. Does he have a Nixon tattoo on the back of his neck?
No, he doesn't. Oh. But he's also well-educated, and I trust his opinion on almost anything but politics. And he shared like I said, a YouTube video from a Stanford physician named Dr. John Ioannidis, who's talking about the data and how the data that we have is not as pure as it needs to be to come up with an accurate percentage on the death rates. And it's for those that are familiar with statistics, it's only going to be an average of where we're at. It may be 5%, it may be 1%. Regardless, it's much worse than the flu. And what I find is conspiratorial about this is that because he's right-wing, they're trying to find facts where they can to propagate those facts and tie it to their politics. And, the conversations that we've been texting and having via phone over the last month or so, always revert back to this, that he basically thinks that it's, we shouldn't be as alarmed and we're killing the economy. And obviously, since I work in oil and gas.
Sorry about that noise, Jason. Someone is making muffins.
It's all good. And so since the space with which we work in is majority right-leaning, everyone wants to find some kind of factual bias to whether it's the nefarious conspiracy theories that are way out there, or if it's something that's using something that's slightly factual to augment their
and it's
point.
It's far worse now because these slickly edited videos and social media, I firmly believe that the lies travel so much faster than the truth can to catch up. Jacob
Agreed.
In the chat, all good points. Jason's down in Louisiana and the hotbed of it all. Jacob writes on the chat, most conspiracies for me break down once I start thinking about the number of people required to pull it off. 9/11, COVID-19. Can you even fathom how many people would have to organize around these horrible things happening to humans and never talk about it later? It's such a great point that I've made a lot of times too. You can't keep a secret with 3 people, much less 10, much less however many would need to pull this off. And the craziest thing to me is these motivations being ascribed to Bill Gates. What, that he wants to make money? He has more money than anybody almost, and he created an organization for people with his kind of wealth to give it away. And his pet cause, like every billionaire has one, to justify the fact that they somehow are worth that much money more than another human. Like, by the way, if that were in the natural world, how would that work? One bird has all the food? I don't think so. Anyway, he's sitting there spending that money curing polio, HIV, malaria, saving millions of lives. It doesn't make any sense at all. And you have to be, I don't know what you have to be to buy into it and to believe it. He's not even Jewish.
People are still listening to Alex Jones. He had a rally here in Austin yesterday with a couple hundred people. It's ridiculous.
Alex Jones is at the height of it. And I think the bad thing is these people, we used to, condescending liberals in the media, especially I always took them seriously, I'll say to my credit. I said, watch out for these guys. I know a lot of people listening to them, but would just say, oh, they're just on the fringe. No, Donald Trump doesn't believe in climate change, thinks windmills cause cancer, and thinks, autism and vaccines are related. The leader of our country is a conspiracy theorist, and he could care less about science, obviously. Who else wants to say something about these conspiracy theories? John Roberts, who looks like a young Brian Dennehy, bless his soul.
Yes. Well, yes, a little bit younger. I'll be 71 in June.
You look great. Look at that head of hair, you son of a bitch.
Retired mathematics teacher. So this is kind of in my wheelhouse a little bit. I just had a conversation with my sister-in-law on Facebook, and I don't want to go, you can't do it. you just can't go. But you got to respond. She put on a Rush Limbaugh thing about, oh, here's what happened with H1N1. Obama did this, and nobody freaked out, and blah, blah, blah. You've seen it. Rush not the only one that's done it, but she posted. It's got Rush's picture.
Yeah.
So I just responded and said,
Medal of Honor winner.
That's
Rush
not
Limbaugh?
First of all, my daughter responded and said, well, that's not right. And she said, well, what's wrong with his numbers? And I said, okay, I got to step in. And I said, the numbers are correct. And actually, it was 12,000. He actually had the correct numbers down. But I said, that's over a year. I said, we led the world in subduing that. The United States led the world on that. And that is the total number of deaths and total number of infections for the whole year. And I said, that's where the lie is. And I got a response from her, got a response from her friend, a response from her daughter. And nobody wanted to listen to nobody wanted to talk about the comments. I said, well, gee, I thought Rush's comments were interesting. Well, yeah, they're interesting, but I said something about them. And Pete, it's like you've talked on your shows. I talk in my classes. I talk to anybody that I ran a guy out of the American Legion the Veterans Day after Trump was elected. He was in there shooting off. You talked about 9/11 stuff, and and the guy was holding court, and I'm sitting there, and we just had the veterans presentation for Veterans Day with some friends of mine. One of them being a World War II veteran, and all I did was ask him questions. You just keep asking questions.
Yes.
Well, how do you know that? Oh, Hillary Clinton. And wait a minute. Why would she do that?
Right.
All power. And I said, what kind of power did she get from that? Well, finally, I got him. He was babbling a little bit. And this friend of mine, I think I had him mad. And this World War II veteran of mine is great. He's 90-something. And he says, you know what I think about all this? And he flipped a bird to the guy. He's a big Democrat.
Is there any tape of that?
I don't know. He was all ready to storm out the door. But when this 90-something World War II veteran flipped him the bird, that was it.
But
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you got to keep the only thing you can do, because you get to shouting, well, then you're persecuting them. But if you've got to keep your cool and do that, and keep in mind that you're probably not going to get through to them, but maybe you're going to get through. There's a couple of guys there nearby that were listening.
That's a really important point. That a lot of times people will say, when I was arguing with someone live, they'll say, you're not convincing that person. I'm like, yeah, there are other people listening though that will be convinced.
But you've got to go, I think, and as I say, there were other people there, and I have two rules. Did you ask me a question, number one?
Mm-hmm.
And two, if you're holding court. Well, I guess if they're calling the Pete Dominick show, then that's holding court. Okay?
I do a little
you
court
came on the show
yeah.
and you made a comment. Now I'm going to respond. And so that's what this guy was doing. He's walking around in the Legion and he's shooting his mouth off. And hey, you're throwing out on my ears, so you can't say, "Well, I don't want to hear what you got." Hey,
yeah, if you're going to be spouting nonsense
you're going to talk
in public,
talk like
you're going to get.
I'm going to talk back.
You know, I always said, for those of you who don't believe that we landed on the moon, that men landed on the moon, I'm not going to argue with you with science. I'd just like to show you this video of Buzz Aldrin punching a guy in the face. The greatest video, by the way, on the internet is Buzz Aldrin being accosted by a guy who accuses him of committing a complete conspiracy that we didn't walk on the moon. And then Buzz Aldrin, in all his late, 70s, early 80s, punches the guy right in the goddamn face. And I don't condone violence, but I certainly did that time. It is glorious. Who else on conspiracy theories? I got like 2 more minutes. Francis.
I just have a quick contribution. What drives me crazy about this stuff is that in reality, we see a lot of systemic, oppression that's going on, situations where people aren't able to get access to healthcare. And instead of people getting worked up about this and trying to start an uprising about this, people with privilege or whatever it might be decide to start like pointing somewhere else and saying that this isn't really happening. When day by day, people are dying that should have access to this. We should have access to just getting tested so that this kind of stuff stops. But instead, that's not where we're looking. Instead, we're...
Yeah, I don't know if you heard my interview with Dr. Ibram Kendi the other day, but he had some very interesting statistics about people, specifically people of color in America, are far more likely to be concerned about the pandemic because they're more likely, unfortunately, be living closer to the edge. And so they're more vulnerable to it. They're more likely to be working. So this idea that if you have a certain sense of privilege, if you don't have to be on the front lines, that it's easier to buy into some crazy shit is a really fascinating. I think that's what you're saying, Francis. It's like, I can't believe those of you that, don't even have to deal with this, worry about it as much, who have insurance, who don't have to be on the front lines. You're the ones waving your crazy conspiracy flags. Whereas the people who are actually most vulnerable to contracting this disease, who are working often close to it, are absolutely concerned about it and buying into the government statistics. So I don't know. That's just some statistics behind, I think, a little bit of what you were saying. Who else, before we got to go, wants to weigh in? Karen Madison, everybody.
Peter.
How's the single life?
I'm okay today.
You got
I'm okay today.
Stuffed animal in there? What are we? Who are you talking to? Are you talking to a poster?
Not today. I actually got some phone calls based off of our podcast conversation.
Oh, great.
So,
great.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Everybody pause and look at Tom holding up his dog. This is not going to be great for the listener, but what a lovely dog for those of you watching. This is why you have to be a patron to join, to see Tom's dog. What a weird way to sell the show. Karen.
Okay. No, but just for people, I mean, even women of color, the disparities in healthcare anyway. That's a concern. What if we get sick on a good day outside of the pandemic? We get subpar healthcare even if we have good healthcare. So to go in and get treatment and get heard and have people listen to us without being dismissive, that's something that is documented to this day. The death rate of women giving birth, of women of color, is already at a higher rate. We have some of the highest mortality during childbirth, much similar to third world countries.
Right.
So now we have this pandemic where we don't even have the right assessments, enough testing to do to really even gauge if people have COVID-19. And now hospitals are overrun. And now we have people with conspiracy theories like, oh, you're not sick. You might not be symptomatic, and being dismissed. And now we have people going back into the communities, not just the struggling communities, but going back into any community with the disease, not having been tested, and going back and spreading for a longer period of time, infecting more and more people. And then now we have that guy trying to tell the world that we're going to open up the economy, and then just keep spreading and spreading and spreading, and we're just never going to get out.
That
and
guy
I'm never going to leave the house.
Whose name will not be spoken by.
No,
Karen.
and then I'm going to have to talk to you all day long.
Steve, my friend Steve, who works in the federal government, writes in the chat here, I think we need to separate the two parts of the government. The civil servants I work with are working their asses off responding to the COVID-19 issue. The political appointees I watch seem spooked by the micromanagement coming from the cabinet level and White House that results in fuck-ups and ineffective action. Trump only cares about his power that comes from someone working in the government listening to the show. I didn't say your last name, did I? All right. Anybody else before we wrap up? Going back to Dr. Barry, go ahead in Florida. How's Florida doing, by the way? What a...
I saw a great meme the other day that said if you could give up any state to end the COVID virus, why would you pick Florida? So I feel, we had a lot of pain down here.
Well, I would have, to be fair to you, before this, I would have picked Florida.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's nothing new, but we just to touch on Florida super quick. So they reopened the beaches in Jacksonville the other day. I don't know if you saw any of the pictures of the enormous crowds of people hanging out together in Jacksonville. So while we're doing very well and our numbers are lower than we expected, we haven't hit the peak yet, but it looks like it's going to be lower. I don't know if reopening quickly is going to help that. And to touch on Karen's point, and by the way, it was great to see Karen's face after that wonderful conversation you had with her the other day. I want to point out that one of the great conspiracy theories during the Obamacare discussion was that we were going to have death panels. Death panels were going to be something that Obamacare was going to provide us. Well, I want to point out that everybody pushing to rush people back to work right now is a card-carrying member of a death panel. You are forcing people to go back early. and putting other people at risk, you've decided that some people are worth less than others. And I think we really ought to be mindful of that as we move forward.
So well said. So well said. And probably a good point to end. What do folks think of the policy? And I know this is harsh and maybe too punitive. You know me, I'm not very much into punishment. But, I mean, if you have groups of people on the beach in Florida, how do you all feel about a giant bulldozer that pushes them into the sea? Where are people on that? Is that too – is that – okay. A lot of thumbs up. Nobody seems to be rejecting that premise. The bulldozer solution to pushing those idiots that are congregating on the beach into the sea.
Opening the beaches in Jacksonville is no different than keeping Central Park open. They never closed that. I'm in Jacksonville. I'm a little biased. I don't live near the beach, but I don't think there are that many people as the media is portraying.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to side with Central Park or the beach. I mean, they closed the parks near my house, and it sucks, and I support it. It sucks, and I support it. You know, it's just the way it's got to be temporarily, I think it's fair to say.
Okay, but are you a runner?
Yes.
So are you on a treadmill?
No, I run in the streets now. I run in the streets of the, of the suburbs. Go ahead.
Well, I walk around here in the streets, and I see a lot more people out than there. I mean, I used to be on a treadmill.
Yep.
So aren't there a lot more people out?
If you're saying the solution is to actually no, not where I live, but it's just anecdotal. But are you saying that we shouldn't close the parks because it pushes people into the streets? I'm not sure what you're saying, Elizabeth.
People were a lot closer than 6 feet together on that beach in all the pictures I saw. I can walk in my neighborhood without getting 6 feet from other people. But when you go to the beach, are you parking and having to get out and park in a crowded parking lot? I haven't been to the Jacksonville beaches in years, so I don't remember how it's set up. But
you're right. That is the argument too.
Well,
yeah,
we can all argue about what should be open and what shouldn't be open. But I generally, again, fall inside of the public health officials that are making these very difficult, very unpopular decisions. Nobody wants to close the park. Nobody wants to be known as the guy who closed the park or the beaches. It doesn't, bode well for politicians. But you got to trust and follow the science here. And if the science is saying that that's what we have to do, in my opinion, that's what we have to do. But folks, go ahead, Tina.
I wish we could trust people to be outside and the beach and the park and stay apart, but there's just too much evidence that too many people aren't doing it.
Yeah.
So.
All right, guys, this was awesome. I love hearing all of your feedback, all of your stories, all of your reactions. It's great to see all of you. If you want to be a part of this conversation, I'm going to do this at least once a week, if not more. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Thank all of you so much. It was so great to get your perspectives. And, of course, thank you for listening and subscribing. Joining me today on the program as my guest is MSNBC's Ali Velshi. He is now the host of Velshi Saturdays and Sundays, 8 to 10 a.m. East. I've known Ali Velshi since, 2010. I think we met at CNN, where I often appeared with him on TV when he was an anchor, as well as when he was a host and co-host with our friend Christine Romans of On Your Money, which is a really great show. And we had a lot of fun on that show, learned a lot, had a lot of great discussions. Then he went to Al Jazeera, and then he started joining with me on the radio program at SiriusXM. Then he went to MSNBC, and I joined him there. Great guy, great friend, a personal friend. We had an awesome conversation about a wide range of things, from journalism, responsibility, the media's covering of everything that's happening, and then, of course, everything that's happening, politics, and so much more. At Ali Velshi on Twitter. He's great on Twitter. Follow him there. You can also email him your story as you experience this pandemic, my story at Velshi.com. Now, my conversation with Ali Velshi. I've known my next guest, I think, for, 10 years and 2 networks ago when I met him. And he was the chief business correspondent at CNN. He was the host of Your Money. He was an anchor there. Then he went to Al Jazeera, and now he is a superstar at MSNBC, where I think a lot of MSNBC viewers, regular viewers at least, think that he doesn't sleep because he is on the TV so much. But his new show is now on weekends, 8 to 10 a.m. It's great. It's a roundtable of really smart people. I've been on it, and I love this man deeply and dearly. He is a monster on Twitter as well, at Ali Velshi. Hey, pal, thank you very much for doing this with me.
Nice to be with you, and I'm always happy to be with you, but you're often on my show, so least I can do is spend a little time on yours.
We're friends, right?
We are friends.
Been friends for a long time.
For a long time, and you're actually you're interesting because you fall into a category of friends that I hold of the highest esteem, because you're the opposite of a collector of people. You're a sharer of ideas and people. You're always introducing me to people who also have become friends and sharing your ideas. And I was just talking to somebody on a different conversation I was on about the fact that you've gone and offered out on your Twitter handle to talk to people who just need somebody to talk to, which would have seemed weird 4 months ago, and now is something that we've all come to depend on, right? We all need this human touch, even if it's through the computer, in a way that we didn't think we all needed a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a weird thing when, it reminds me, like, after 9/11, I remember thinking, well, there's nothing I can do. What am I going to go heckle people telling jokes while they're on the rubble? Like, I didn't feel like I had anything I could offer. And I started to feel that way again now, like, what can I do? But the truth is, it feels like what people need is just now connection more than anything else. And I'm talking to, I don't know, probably 10 people a day, almost every day, and it's as good as for me as it is for them. I mean, it's been really super helpful, so it feels great. Let me just ask you a few questions that people probably don't really ask you, and we're going to get into news and everything that you're doing. But what is it like being you? You're on TV all the time, examining really tough issues, and you have been for 10 years, longer than 10 years. I'm just thinking back at CNN when I met you. What is it like being Ali Velshi just in public, walking down the street? How do people generally respond to you? Because you are a fairly egoless guy, which is why I admire you a lot. Most people on TV aren't like you.
I appreciate you saying that. It's different. It's really emerged, right? In the CNN days, my colleague Christine Romans and I were business reporters, and we were very active during the financial crisis, and people got to know us, and, they thank us for helping them, answering their questions and trying to get through it. But then we both started anchoring American Morning, the morning show, and people would say, I watch you. I'm in the gym, and I watch you while I'm on the treadmill, or, they'll say things like, I see you in the gym, or I wake up to you every morning. And I'm thinking to myself, you can't be seeing me in the gym because I'm never in the gym, and you certainly didn't wake up next to me. But it was that kind of thing. It has completely evolved in this era, and this is pre-coronavirus, but in the last 3.5 years, into a thanks for making things clear. Thanks for helping us through this. Thanks for keeping us sane. It feels a little more like a public service than it used to, which then, to answer your other question, is I'm very grateful to be here, right? To be in a place where, like you are, where we can talk to people. We can have real conversations with people about what's really going on right now, not just from a policy level, not just from the perspective of people who have PR agencies and communications people, and from the perspective of presidents and governors and prime ministers. This story is about how it's affecting real people. And the idea that I have spent 20 or 30 years developing that familiarity, as you have, where you can just reach out to people and say, tell me what's up, right? I started a brand new email address called mystory@velshi.com, and just ask people, just tell me your story. Send me your pictures, send me your videos, send me a note if you want me to talk about it on TV. But if you don't, that's okay too.
That's cool.
I feel really grateful to be in a place where I'm told on a daily basis how I can be helpful to people, what they need to know, what they want from me, and that I have the platforms to be able to deliver it. So, somebody said to me the other night, somebody tweeted me and said, you look tired. And I said, yeah. And I look outside the window and I see the police, and I see the nurses, and I see the EMTs, and I see the doormen, and I see the delivery people, the food delivery people, and the fresh direct people. And when they work, I work. And when they rest, I'll rest. And one day we'll rest. One day we'll get to the other side of this thing. But right now we're all in it together.
Well, it does. People, so often, because they know we're friends, will ask me, what's that guy's deal? Does he sleep? Does he rest? And it's always funny. But how I just want to ask you one more question, because I'm just really personally curious. Like, you were on every afternoon for a couple of years with Stephanie Ruhle. Now you're still on as seemingly almost every day, and you fill in for the primetime shows, and now you're hosting your own show, of course, again on the weekends. Like, what is your schedule like? I mean, how do you relax, if you relax at all?
Yeah, the schedule's full time now. It's all the time, no matter when. And as you know, as journalists, we put our hand up for this. I had a boss at CNN once who told somebody in simpler times who was complaining about their schedule to say, this isn't the draft. We didn't cause you to do this. You put up your hand to do it. And some days it's really great and easy being me, right? I get invited to functions and I speak for a little while and they're fancy and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes there are hurricanes, and sometimes there are war zones, and sometimes there are recessions, and sometimes there's terrorism, and now there's a pandemic, and you take it all. So the good thing, Pete, is that I'm the worst sleeper I know, right? I've just never been a sleeper. I have tried every medication there is and every system there is and every device there is. I'm a bad sleeper. So I happen to have found the profession that's good for me. And my bosses kind of have figured that out, that I don't sleep much anyway. It's not all that disruptive. My wife packed up about a month ago and shipped off. We've always split our time between New York and Philadelphia. So she's out there. So I'm not even disturbing anyone. And so I work when they need me. And I'll take my time off when the time comes. I can't really decompress easily these days, but that's not what I'm looking for.
I'd love to see. I appreciate that, but I would love to see a picture of you, in a Hawaiian shirt and a drink next to the pool to the beach.
When that happens, I will send you the picture for sure.
Well, the great thing about you, and this is the thing that I think very few journalists on television have the ability to do, and you've always been able to do this. You can have, you can crunch and prep on a very complex issue in a very short amount of time and then bring it on television and explain it in a way that we can understand it really, really well. And I don't have a question. I just think I wanted to say on the record that there's nobody that I've met, and I've been inside the belly of the beast for a long time, that is able to do that, whether it be financial, whether it be scientific, or now obviously medical. Your ability to do that is exceptional. I don't know how you do it, but I think that's your greatest talent. What is the shortest amount of notice that you've ever been given that you had to go anchor an hour of television?
Well, during this coronavirus crisis, there have been a couple of very close calls because we're all doing this from our home, and the technology, I think we're pretty good at it now, but certainly in the first week we had problems where somebody's shot just didn't work. So I'd be right. I mean, I'm literally 12 seconds from between my bedroom and my camera. So I was
a huge place in New York City
weeks ago to do that. But it's happened where literally I've been told, one of my bosses has called and I'll be somewhere in the building at 30 Rock while we were still working there. And they'd say, can you get the set right now? We've got a difficulty. Something's gone down or there's some breaking news or whatever the case is. So I live ready. You've seen me, Pete. I always carry my IFB, my earpiece. It's always hooked to my jacket, even when I'm out. Like if I'll meet somebody for a drink after work, I'll still have it on because I'm always sort of ready to go. And that's, again, we all have a different stock in trade, and that's mine, right? I'm ready to go, and I believe that my best job is if I can create an access ramp for my viewers into any conversation we're having. And the more complex, the better, because I don't get any of this stuff. I wasn't trained in business. So everything I talk about in business, I learned. So I think that helps my viewer that I talk about a lot of things that I don't really understand, right? I don't understand anything about virology or epidemiology or infectious diseases or collateral default swaps or anything like that. So I have to learn it all, and I have to sit there and say, if I don't understand this, I can't expect my viewer to do so. And if my viewer doesn't understand it, what service have I provided to them? There's lots of people to debate political ideology and all sorts of approaches to problems. But if I'd like to be the person to explain it, then other people smarter than me can debate it.
Yeah, I think you're being modest, but I appreciate that answer. I mean, it is your ability to understand these things is uncanny, and your ability to explain them to us is also. But I also find myself often when watching you ask questions to your panel and to your experts, I'm often thinking, I want to know what Velshi thinks about the question he just asked. And you're not really in the business of sharing your opinion, but you do sometimes say, I think this or that. And you're also really good and always have been at crushing false equivalencies. And so how much do you feel like you skirt the line between kind of being really objective on things and sharing your opinion at times on things? How do you balance that? Because I know you're constantly thinking about that.
Yeah, so I've sort of made an active decision not to balance it, instead to signpost it, right? I think that I have zero problem with opinion. I love opinion. I love listening to people's opinion. I'm in awe of people who can develop an opinion and articulate it and convince people. My issue is whether my viewers are getting confused as to what's opinion, what's fact, what's news, what's explanation. So I'm trying to get better at expressing to my viewer, here I'm going to lay out to you what's going on. This guest has a strong opinion of it. Or I'm going to present something in a way with branding perhaps on the screen that indicates that this is my point of view on something, or this is my perspective. And I'm not going to argue that I've gotten good at it yet. I'm trying to get good at it. I want to just have my viewer know, oh, this is what Velshi thinks about this. And I'll often say the reason I like single-payer health care is because I'm Canadian. I grew up in it, and I saw it as a very successful thing. It's actually, I'll often talk about single-payer health care, and then people will say, oh, he's a Bernie bro or something. And so I didn't know who Bernie Sanders was when I got to go to the hospital for free when I was a kid. I just thought the system works better than the one we have here, where a guy like me can't figure out this thing called open enrollment and how you get medical coverage. So I like to tell people why I think a certain way. My Twitter handle says that I was born in Kenya. I'm a Kenyan-born Muslim. You might think that is associated with a way of thinking. But my point is, tell people where you're coming from on something. Tell people why you're taking that position, and tell them when you're taking a position and when you're not. And if folks are clear on that, then they can say, Velshi, I like you for your news and your explanations. I don't really care much for your opinions, but I'll take them because you're actually good at explaining stuff. I think that helps the viewer curate a little bit more about what they want from me and how they can benefit from the news that I bring.
That reminds me, what is your joke or response when the fact that for years, unfortunately, still many people think that Barack Obama was a Kenyan-born Muslim? He's neither, right. But you are. So how do you how did you ever play that?
The fact that he was never at any of the meetings.
All right, so
Muslims have an association.
Right. There's a cabal, sure.
International chapters, and he was never at one. He wasn't an absentee. He didn't do an associate membership, and it kind of annoys me, right? Because I did actually grow up being the most famous Kenyan-born Muslim I knew until Barack Obama.
So I want to talk to you about the way and how you're covering the coronavirus stuff. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the way and how you're covering politics in the era of Donald Trump. And it's really a fascinating time because I've been getting criticized by some listeners lately that I'm too partisan, that I'm too opinionated. And the word partisan is interesting and to kind of unpack, but I know that you and other television anchors and journalists, and as well as in print, struggle with this because it's sometimes very difficult to find really articulate and intelligent people to defend much of what the president is doing or saying, including in his own administration. And increasingly, it's difficult to find those people to come on television. It's not, to me, the way we used to look at it pre-Trump, with Obama and Bush before him, that it was Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, and there was a partisanship that you could call out, that you could try to protect against. Now it's this kind of cult of personality, and it's an ideology that doesn't fall into a partisan ideology. It falls into what the president said today, and even this idea that I've seen that people have flags with his name on them.
It's identity politics now, right? It's this weird thing where people who had some form of identity politics, it's like Donald Trump is a form of identity politics, right? It's like a characteristic of who you are, and it's weird because it's not hard to find people to come on TV to defend Trump. It's hard to find people to come on TV and be reasonable in their approach to it, right? And not sycophantic and not weird about it. I have enjoyed for a long time really good relationships with a lot of conservatives because I focus on, or I used to focus on economics a lot. So I talk to a lot of conservative economists, and I can speak to a lot of people who say, look, conservative economists don't like this approach, or they do like the lower taxes, or whatever the case is, notwithstanding the fact that Donald Trump is a unusual character unto himself. But when I get the Trump folks on, it becomes different because it stops being about defense of or articulation of a policy prescriptive that makes sense. It starts being about Donald Trump and partisanship, right, or this weird identity. And I find it very difficult because I don't want to just provide my audience with comfortable stuff that is exactly what they all live in. But it is challenging for me to find the people who can come on and have a smart conversation about why this approach may make sense versus a different approach. It all becomes Trump versus not Trump.
Well, they're not, and they're never traditional approaches or ideas or plans that we've heard from conservatives in the past. They're often just things that he says. I mean, a great example of what we're talking about is this past week when the president talked about how he had complete and total authority. I tried desperately to find a conservative constitutional law scholar that would defend that, but there's nobody that is in academia or that practices law even that would defend that. So you couldn't defend his statements there. You couldn't find somebody to do it.
I think this was bombast, right? I think this is Donald Trump saying, I'm going to say this and I'm going to throw red meat out and have people talk about it for a few days. And then, which is exactly what he did yesterday, he gets on TV and he said, governors, it's your call. It was always the governor's call as to when the states open. This was never actually a legal question at all. The only time it would have been a question, Pete, is if the president had shown leadership, probably in January, but maybe in February, when I had been talking about it on my show. I should never have better intelligence about something than the U.S. government has, and had taken leadership and had said, these are the best practices we're going to employ. And then guys like Cuomo and Pritzker and other governors would have said, wow, the White House is really leading on this, so we're going to follow, not because the Constitution says we have to, but because it's the right thing to do. And boy, we've got the power of the federal government. They're procuring masks and they're procuring ventilators and all that. But they abdicated that responsibility, which is fine because the governors and mayors of this country have taken on that responsibility. But then for the president to go out and say, I'm in charge, you're right. You're 100% right. And those are instances where it's not partisan. I can throw a dart and find a constitutional expert or a lawyer to come on my TV, and I can ask them a simple question, not partisan. Is he right or is he wrong? And 112 out of 110 times, the answer is going to be the president's completely wrong. But he is masterful in his manipulation of the media for having had that in the news cycle for 24 hours.
Let's talk about, you're all right about that. And I have so many things to follow up on, but I want to move on to something else I really wanted to get to with you, because right now there's this crazy argument happening in America right now where people are starting to protest. Let us get back to our lives. And the president is talking about, he's been setting different dates and so on. The rest of the world is using data to make these decisions. Most of America is using data to make these decisions. The president is pushing to get back out there, and a lot of Republican leaders are as well. And going back to economics, you said conservative economics. We can argue about what's morally right or what, how an economic policy actually plays out, who the winners and losers are. But Ali Velshi, in this case, when I look at this, the economic argument, put aside for a second, if we possibly can, in good conscience, the death, put it aside for a second.
Right.
If we go back now, or when he wants us to, or before the data says that we should, and we have the testing and tracing in place, the economy will be far worse. It will be hit far harder. We all understand the impatience that people have, that people want to get back to work and want to get back to we get that.
I get it. I totally get that this doesn't feel good. The president's been tweeting about liberate Virginia, liberate Michigan. He's taking states with Democratic governors who have put stay-at-home orders, and he's tweeting out to liberate. So they went to the State House in Michigan. It was crazy. I mean, they were chanting "lock her up" about the governor who was doing something entirely within her law, supported by data and evidence, to do a stay-at-home order, which kind of everybody in America has done. And there are people protesting "lock her up." This is like the Tea Party on steroids, gone wild. Because the Tea Party had some interesting ideas, right, about being constitutionalists, and it was a little bit weird, but they had some interesting ideas. This is not interesting ideas. This is stupidity.
Well, the Tea Party had ideas about like balancing the budget and things like that. But again,
interesting things that we can debate. There's nothing interesting to debate about about the infectious rate of a disease and gathering together and social distancing. The debate is whether it should be 6 feet or 12 feet. The debate is when we reopen our cities, do we put mandates in places like New York City where you're cheek to jowl in a bar and you're cheek to jowl in a restaurant, whether there's protective measures between patrons and seats that are different? That's what you debate. Lock her up. Liberate. The president of the United States is sending tweets saying liberate, and he's putting a state. That's it. The state, liberate Michigan.
But to be
What's
clear,
going on?
But to be clear, if we go back to work, or if we do what he is suggesting and what a lot of people want, we will all suffer economically worse. Again, I'm putting aside the public health thing. The economy will lose more money. We'll have to go. It wouldn't work. This policy that they want to go back to work will only make things for the economy at the local and state and obviously national level far worse. Am I right about that? It's not. It's a straw man argument. It wouldn't make sense.
I've been having this conversation on TV every time I can, and I try and assemble economists, epidemiologists, public health experts, infectious disease people, and they've all said something similar along the lines of, first of all, stop setting dates, right? You will know, and yesterday at the White House, they finally put out phases, right? If you've achieved phase 1, you should go to phase 2. If you achieve phase 2, go to phase 3. So forget the dates for a minute. And by the way, that was the president's task force. So today, with all his liberate nonsense, I'm not quite sure. But put that aside for a second. If you have proper testing, and you have antibody testing, and we know that either you or I have had coronavirus and we've got some immunity, we can go back. If we don't have testing, we know that you can use UVC lights, you can use protective measures. Like, there are things you can say to say, this is the way in which we're going to get back to work. And you think about it scientifically, and you think about it organizationally, and you do it that way. As opposed to this, the president tweeted that it's an extended vacation. Democrats are supporting an extended vacation. I don't know a single person who, after being shut in for a month, thinks that sticking around at home and not working is a good idea or wants more of it. So there's a way to do this. There is a way to exercise the correct leadership on it. We will not see it in our lifetimes. I will grow a big fuzzy afro before we get to that point.
Me too. But the other really difficult thing in this situation, and in many other situations, and in life in general, is proving a negative. And so I'm arguing with some fool on Twitter yesterday who is saying, why do you talk about trusting the science? The science has said there'd be millions of deaths. And I'm like, I don't know who said there'd be millions, but even if they did, what they were saying is, yes, there would be if we don't isolate, if we don't socially distance. So the problem here, same thing with other scientific or economic arguments, is we have to prove a negative. We have to prove to people the policies that we put in place lessened the amount of contraction of this virus and death. That's why those numbers didn't come true, because of what we did. How do we do that? How do we prove it negative?
Ventilators if we don't do this. So then we social distance, and people said, oh my God, what I don't want to do is end up at the hospital needing a ventilator, and there won't be a ventilator. But it's like climate change. It's like cigarettes. The problem is the merchants of nonsense are just better at this than we are, Pete. They're able to put stuff out there. So people say the same thing about the Earth, right? They say it's going to warm, but it's not going to warm. I don't know what you get for being on the wrong side of this argument. That's my point, is that this one's actually a life and death matter. So is climate change, but it doesn't feel as urgent because you're not seeing it happen on a daily basis. But boy, can you imagine if we took climate change as seriously as we take coronavirus? But it is not worthwhile getting involved with those people who don't think so, except for this. We're going to pay for their health care if they're not covered, if they go out and behave this way, and they might get us sick. If you don't take this seriously, I mean, at the Michigan State House, there were people telling these people, please don't get out of your cars and do a rally. You can't actually do a rally in the middle of social distancing. That's just dangerous and stupid. And yet they did it. So this is where I don't really care what your political ideology is. But when it gets to the point that it endangers your life or mine, we need to think about this.
It's a really interesting case study and kind of debunking this idea of libertarianism. Let me do whatever I want. Yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. But you're a host. If you do whatever you want, you're going to go get the virus and you're going to bring it to me. And not because we're friends or family members, but because I went past you in the grocery store. You can't just do whatever you want. So Let me ask you one more really important question. I think I don't. This is a hard one to answer. I think Kurt Anderson's book Fantasyland goes a long way. It's a big, thick book trying to answer this. But you have been talking, and I've been talking to experts for years. I think the problem with the medium that you're in is television. Is that those conversations are too short, which is why I love podcasts and radio, because you can have a longer conversation. Nonetheless, why do you think it is that a huge segment of the American population and public has lost support, interest in, trust in, expertise in certain institutions on things? It's a huge question, and you can answer it in many different ways. But you've always interviewed experts. It's what you're doing now. Why don't we trust them?
So I think there's two things. One is this more recent phenomenon about globalists and elitists, right? The whole thing that Steve Bannon is on, right? If you're global or global in nature, or you think globally, it's some kind of cabal that is meant to undermine American greatness. And so that's generally negative and elitist. And by the way, for another time, it's an interesting argument, right? Do those of us who talk about people all the time without knowing what their actual experiences are, is that weird and out of place? And you know that when I was at Al Jazeera, I really made it my business to sort of seek out people who are voiceless to say, maybe we should get the story from them as opposed to from the top. And I think that's a good way for us to think about reporting. But go back to Ronald Reagan saying, the worst thing you can hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, that's just not true. And in fact, in the midst of coronavirus, I would like nothing more than somebody to say, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. And by the way, I've got the best resources and the best evidence and the best science. But we have spent 40 to 50 years, Ronald Reagan did it, Margaret Thatcher did it, in debunking the authority of government. This is not a worldwide phenomenon. It is to some degree, but it's not as bad as it is in the United States. In other countries, we don't actually think that the government and authority and elites are as bad or as dangerous as they are. But we've made elite into an expert into a pejorative. We've made globalism into a pejorative. Again, for a different time, we can discuss how much of that criticism is true. And I think some of it is. I mean, I go to Davos every year, and sometimes I just shake my head thinking, do you people know what the real world is? Like, do you live in it? But we have, in the process of debunking some of it, we have gone too far to the point that now we think that anybody with expertise on something doesn't really understand the common person. And I think that is dangerous. And that is work that you and I have to do, because we have the privilege not just of interviewing experts, but of talking to a lot of people who are not experts in anything except being human, which is the most important thing to be expert in. And I think we've increased our coverage of that recently in an effort to understand how this affects, everyday Americans. And that's incumbent upon us to fight back on this nonsense about dismissing expertise.
The most interesting question right now to me and every day, and there's no right or wrong way to answer this, is what does this change about our lives, about our society, about the economy, about health? I've had a fascinating conversation on an episode last week with an author and journalist named Steve Levine about the future of the labor movement. You and I have talked, argued, and had thoughtful discussions about organized labor and its strength. And it's interesting to see that there's a lot of public sympathy right now for people that used to just be ignored and voiceless, including immigrants doing this type of work. But how do you answer that? How much do you think about what changes? I know it's asking you to make a prediction and speculate on how society changes, but how much have you thought about that? How in terms of when, if this is ever over, how we live and how we relate to each other and what this changes about our lives?
So my hope is that I look at so many of the things that have been good about the changes that we've made since the Depression, since the industrialized era, rules, labor rules, things like that came about because bad things happened. So I was talking to Richard Trumka, the AFL-CIO, the other day to say that, the rules that we have to keep workplaces safe, some of them came out of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, right, where workers couldn't get out of a room when it was on fire and they died, mostly women, young women. And we changed laws like that. So you can't work in a place where you can't get out from the inside. So we've got OSHA laws. When you work in a workplace, they've got a placard that tells you what your rights are and what has to happen, but there's no one to enforce those laws. If every business got one visit from a federal inspector, Richard Trumka was telling me you'd have one visit every 170 years or something like that. I may be making the number, maybe it's 70 years, but you get the point. Same thing on a state level. So we talk about a $15 minimum wage, and there are still people in this country who oppose it and think that we should have market wages. Well, $15 an hour is $30,000 a year. Okay, this is not the poor taking over the world. We talk about universal health care. We now have conservatives who are giving it a second look, because if we had universal health care, there would be people who would seek health care. There are poor Americans right now who don't have health care, who don't want to know if they've got coronavirus or not, because they can't afford the consequences of being told to stay home from work. Right. So maybe these things will change. Maybe we will start to understand what basic things can make us better as a society, what are morally right. And every day at 7 o'clock, when we go out and clap for those people outside, I do see doctors and I see nurses, I see EMTs, I see police. I also see a lot of guys like delivering food, immigrants. Maybe they're not documented immigrants. I don't know or not whether they are or not, but I know that I wouldn't survive without a lot of them. So maybe we start thinking about those people as humans. Maybe we start thinking of humanity as something more than the sum of their output as it translates to dollars per hour. I think the concept of a universal basic income has become important to us. The deal that the government made with the airlines, where it will pay them money to keep their people on payroll, well, that's a model they used in Denmark. Don't go on unemployment. We'll pay you taxpayer money to companies just to be used for payroll.
Yeah, I think
so
Germany
this
too.
is over and your company comes back in. You can get back to work. So I think some interesting things will happen, but we've got to keep our foot to the pedal on this to make sure that change does occur.
All right, final question. A lot of times people, critics, regular folks, lump all cable news networks in together, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. And I think that's always, not a very nuanced way or accurate way to think about things. You've worked at CNN and Al Jazeera and now, of course, at MSNBC. And I wonder, do you know the people at Fox News? Do you have a relationship with Hannity or Tucker or Laura Ingraham, who sometimes you're up against when you're filling in for those 7, 8, and 9 time slots? And what do you think about what they are doing versus what you are doing? Because I think you're pretty much the very best on cable news in terms of what you are doing, what you are trying to do, and what your effort is. And I think it's very, very different than what they're doing. But what's your relationship, if anything, with them, and how do you differentiate yourself from them?
So I do have a number of friends at Fox News, and I actually think a number of people there do good journalistic work. I don't have any relationship with the people you mentioned. I've crossed paths with Tucker Carlson because he used to appear at CNN, as you know. He used to be on CNN, but we don't have any relationship. I think in the last 2 months or 3 months, including as recently as last night, they have provided a disservice to America, and they have endangered the lives of Americans. They work off of the same information that we work off. So to come to the conclusion that this was not to be taken seriously and this was a Democratic hoax and this was no more serious than the flu, it's just not possible. I'm just not that smart a guy, Pete. I've got the same information you have access to and they have access to. Why you draw a conclusion that you will endanger people's lives to support somebody's political motivations is beyond me. I think it's been a massive failure. I have admiration for a lot of things Fox does, including staying on brand and attracting the viewership they attract, and they have remarkable production values. But I think some of the stuff that's gone on in the last few months has been dangerous, and I hope they think this through very seriously. And I think there's a space for people who have good ideologically conservative views to articulate those well and debate them. And that's a space that Fox can occupy that can be helpful to society. Right now, that's not what it's doing.
Saying Fox News, giving a compliment by saying them is that they have great production value is like saying to a comedian after he came off stage and bombed, you looked confident up there. Email mystory@velshi.com if you want to share a story. Watch Ali Velshi on Saturday and Sunday, 8 to 10 a.m., and all kinds of various other hours on MSNBC. Follow him on Twitter, where he is really, really great, at Ali Velshi. My friend, for a long time, I truly value my relationship with you, and I always smile when I hear your voice or see your crazy head.
I feel the same way about you, mostly because you have the same kind of head. Thanks, my friend. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Okay, there you go. Ali Velshi, at Ali Velshi on Twitter. Such a great guy, so generous, so thoughtful, so smart. Nobody really can crunch information as quickly and as accurately as he can, and then present it to an audience as digestible as he can. I love that guy. And I'm so happy he joined me, and he will be joining me more, I am sure. And thank you to the over 30 subscribers who joined me at the top of the show. I love doing that. I want to do that a lot more as well. Subscribe, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Coming up the rest of the week, the great Dan Savage will join me. My favorite nature writer, Rich Louv, and much, much more. I am getting the very best guests to join me in a long-form conversation daily. Tell your friends. Stand up with Pete Dominic.